Okay, today we're going to talk about calcium supplements, and one of the reasons that I am so interested in calcium supplements and why it means so much to me. Standard calcium supplements may be detrimental to your heart, and we were driven at Cardiotabs to develop a highly absorbable, heart health promoting, bone building supplement. Not just a calcium supplement, but the key words here are bone building. So I want to tell you a story. This was my mother. She was in her early 30s here, and this is when she was standing up straight and a very healthy and happy 30-something-year-old. She lived in Hawaii and then moved to San Francisco, where she met my father. My mother did a whole lot right. She was always ideal body weight. She didn't really exercise, but she walked, she mowed the lawn, she gardened. She was always extremely active. But when I was a small child, she was falsely diagnosed as being diabetic. And I remember my mother every single night. She would sit on her bed, surrounded by books about how the best way to eat was going to be for her diabetes and for the nutrition of her family. So it was at this point in time that I became very interested in nutrition. Now, as I said earlier, my mother did a whole lot right. She ate well. We always had a big garden. We had fruit trees, more than anyone could imagine in our yard. Guavas, plums, apricots, cherries, persimmons. We had an enormous amount of fresh food. There were a couple of things that my mother didn't do right, though. One of them was that she didn't do any strength training, but that really was not in vogue when my mother was a younger woman. The other thing is that my mother really didn't like milk. So she did not drink milk. Her calcium intake was very minimal throughout most of her adult life. My mother is built a lot like me. She is very fine-boned. So what happened through the years, which we didn't really understand, was that as my mother aged and lost muscle mass, she was also losing bone. One day in her early 90s, my mother was kneeling down, getting something out of the bottom the bottom drawer of the refrigerator. And she lost her balance because of a loss of muscle mass and tumbled over. Well, that was the beginning of her spinal fractures. We didn't realize that she was so osteoporotic until just with one small fall, she started with these spinal fractures. Well, this continued, the falling and the fractures, the falling and the fractures, and the falling and the fractures. And before my mom died, she basically never or was not standing up straight. She went through her entire day basically looking at her feet. This is my mom. Oh, here we go. This is my mom in the hospital after she broke her hip. It was Mother's Day, and I'm an only child. All of my kids had called her, my husband had called her, my cousins had called her, and it was that last phone call at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And she picked up the phone, she dropped it, she went down to pick it up, she went head over heels, and she fractured her hip. Her whole hip bone basically looked like shattered glass. There were many fractures in her hip. Now, this is my mom, as I say, right before she died. And her head is leaning over on this pillow because that's the way her neck healed after the many falls and fractures that she had because of her osteoporosis. After my mother broke her hip, it was 6 weeks, and she died. It was a terrible time for me because I had already lost my dad, and I loved my mother very much. But when I knew that my mother was osteoporotic, I really started paying attention to what it was going to take to make sure that my bones and the bones of my two daughters were not going to be frail and brittle like my mom's. So anyway, according to the U.S. Surgeon General's report, 1 in 2 Americans over the age 50 is expected to be at the risk of developing osteoporosis. As I say, osteoporosis ran in my family. It was not only my mother, but it was my cousins. I even have male cousins that have that dowager's hump, which is that hump in the, Erin is now sitting up straight. It's hilarious. Everyone, put your shoulders back and stand up straight. Have that dowager's hump, and you know, on the top of their or on the top of their spine. So osteoporosis runs very heavily in my family, and this is what osteoporosis looks like. Osteoporosis is not only the thinning of the bones, so the bones actually are thinner, but they actually are full of big gaps or holes inside of the bones. So you can kind of imagine, as my mother's hip broke, that when you're trying to put that bone back together, it's almost impossible because you see that there are so many holes in the inside of the bone. It's almost like putting Humpty Dumpty back together. It's virtually impossible. But now look at the healthy bone. If you broke that bone, you see that that would be much easier to put back together. Calcium is the most ever-present mineral in the human body. We need a calcium intake. Every second of the day, every cell in your body is using a calcium molecule. It actually is the accelerator of the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is kind of like your little engine or your little power plant that is in the inside of every cell. And the calcium molecule is needed to run that Krebs cycle. So if you don't have a calcium intake, basically your body is going to leach it from your bones so that the rest of the cells can live and function during the day. Only 30% of the U.S. population consumes the recommended dietary allowance of calcium. We absorb only about 30% of the calcium from foods depending on the specific source. Now, even though I run a supplement company, I absolutely believe that you should try and get your nutrients out of food. But it, as we say, only 30% of the calcium from foods, depending on the specific source, is absorbed. And once again, the body will demineralize its own skeletal system to maintain serum calcium levels. And that's exactly what happened to my mother, is that she did not have an adequate calcium intake. And so her body basically leached it out of her bones to run the rest of the cells in the body. Okay, back to this hunter-gatherer thing that James and I are always talking about. Adult human hunter-gatherers consumed most of their calcium in the form of bones from animals, including small and large mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles. You do not know how many times people say to me, well, you know, we never drank milk as hunter-gatherers. No, we probably didn't drink milk as hunter-gatherers. But what we did do was we chewed bones. We ate the bones in the fish. We chewed the bones on the large mammals. People were getting their calcium out of bones. Now, believe it or not, I can't get my clients to chew bones these days. I just can't get them to chew bones to get a calcium intake. Now, my husband, he'll chew bones, but he's probably an exception. So if you choose to get your calcium out of bones, that's great. But the reality is that most people are not going to chew bones every day. So the next best form comes as milk products. I am an avid milk drinker. I absolutely make sure that my girls, who are now 18 and 14, that they drink their milk. Not only do they have osteoporosis heavily in their family, but if they don't have a calcium intake, they possibly could get it anyway. So it is very important to take in milk products if you can. Dairy foods and beverages account for about 70% of all dietary calcium intake among Americans. My kids don't necessarily always love to drink their milk, but I absolutely insist. Osteoporosis is now a disease of childhood. Legs, arms, collarbones, we're seeing more and more. So it is very important, if we can get the children in our lives to drink and enjoy milk, that really will bode well for them for a lifetime. They're only going to store and make bone into their early 20s. So then that door slams shut, and they're going to have that amount of bone for the rest of their lives. Now, if you're a little girl born in the United States today, you have a 50% chance of living till you're 100. So it's very important to build the strongest, most dense bones that you can before your middle 20s, so that you really have a good starting point for when you're not making bone anymore. On an evolutionary timescale, dairy is relatively a newcomer to our diet, and cow's milk has 4 more times the calcium than human milk, and this might contribute to problems with iron and zinc absorption. Okay, let's go in here. Okay. Approximately 60% of middle-aged U.S. women regularly consume calcium supplements. And we always thought this was a great idea until a few years ago, when we started to realize that calcium supplements possibly might be causing heart disease. And I used to say this to James all the time. You know, this doesn't make any sense to me. We as Americans have the highest rate of calcium supplement intake, and we also have the highest rate of heart disease. And when you go in to the cardiologist to get diagnosed with heart disease, they do what we call a cardio scan. And when we do that cardio scan, we are measuring calcium in the coronary arteries. We get a calcium score. We would like for your calcium score to be 0, but what we were seeing is that the calcium from calcium supplements was, yes, being somewhat absorbed into the bone, but it was also lining the coronary arteries. In contrast, calcium from dietary sources or bone ingestion results in much smaller changes in circulating calcium levels. So that would mean that when we drink or eat low-fat or non-fat milk products, which are the best, that we get much smaller changes in the circulating calcium levels. We don't like to have that spike in the calcium level that we get from taking regular calcium supplements. We're generally adapted to consume a large proportion of our dietary calcium from bones, where calcium is absorbed along with a matrix of nutrients, including magnesium, phosphorus, manganese, zinc, iron, copper, collagen protein, and osteocalcin. So this is where we actually started when we were thinking about our bone supplement. How actually did our ancestors consume calcium, and can we replicate that? So we actually need kind of a balance between the vitamin D, vitamin K1, 2, sodium, potassium, magnesium, all very important for building bone. Our calcium source is actually the form of calcium found in bone. It's less likely to spike the blood calcium levels, so less likely to land in the coronary arteries. It stimulates bone osteoblast cells, which means it stimulates bone growth. So cool. Our bone supplement contains virtually all of the essential building blocks of bone. It's highly absorbed, and as I say, it is made to build bone, not just be a calcium supplement. So when you look down the supplement facts of our Bone Essentials supplement, you see that it's not just calcium and vitamin D. It has taken a lot of scientific effort to really come up with the recipe of how we're going to get the calcium into the bone and not just spike the levels in the blood, which then, when the levels get too high, it lands in the coronary arteries. Okay, so here's kind of a quick comparison of our calcium supplement to Citracal, lactate caps, and calcium carbonate. And as you can see, ours across the board has a more positive reaction. Okay. You basically can save 15% on your entire order when you purchase Bone Essentials. Expires tomorrow. Use the code 15WBONE.
All right, we've received some questions throughout the webinar and before, so we can go ahead and answer those. We have one about someone recently took Bone Essentials and is having some trouble sleeping. Do you think there'd be any correlation? Is there anything in Bone Essentials that might be causing this?
No. You know, if they feel that it is due to Bone Essentials, then I would suggest that they take them earlier during the day. But there really is nothing in there that should affect sleep. Sleep is very important. I want you to get your sleep. All adults need at least 7.5 hours of a good quality of sleep every single night. Make sure you watch your caffeine intake. Make sure you do some walking or some exercise every single day. And try and get to bed early, because the hours before midnight are worth twice as much as the hours of sleep after midnight.
We've got a question on whether or not you can tell how you have osteoporosis. Is there a number on your bone density score they should be looking for?
You know, basically, I think that if you're, I think everyone should have a bone density done. I think that I mean, I've had a couple done already, and I definitely monitor mine just because I have osteoporosis in my family. But I think it really is like a blood pressure or a cholesterol, that you should know your bone density. Very, very, very important, because if we catch it early, we can do a lot about it. You know, we here at Cardiotabs really believe in a healthy lifestyle. So, you know, I want you to do strength training. I want you to walk. I want you to make sure that you have a calcium and vitamin D intake. I want you to watch your salt. I want you to have a high fruit and vegetable intake, because when you have a high fruit and vegetable intake, it actually alkalizes the inside of the body, which reduces the leaching of the calcium out of the bones. So I think that bone health is a lifestyle, and I think that everyone really should have a bone density done.
Do you think you need to wait for that bone density scan to be done before taking a calcium supplement? Or?
Well, you can evaluate your own diet. I mean, women need 3 8-ounce glasses of milk in a day to be able to get enough calcium. I also love non-fat cottage cheese, especially in the summertime. It's just a wonderful breakfast. I like low-fat mozzarella cheese sticks, non-fat Greek yogurt. You can get calcium from any of those, but you need to evaluate your own diet. If you're not getting 3 servings of milk products in a day, as a woman, you need bone essentials.
What if you're already taking Cardiotabs multivitamin? How does Bone Essentials
it fits right in. Yeah, Bone Essentials fits right into to the rest of the Cardiotabs regime. We absolutely made sure of that. But I absolutely believe that if you can't get the calcium from your diet, which I would love for you to do, then you need this product.
And there's no calcium already in the multivitamin?
No,
correct?
There's no calcium in the multivitamin. We made sure of that.
You touched on this earlier with mononutrient forms of calcium, but what are your thoughts on Tums as a calcium supplement?
I don't prefer Tums as a calcium supplement because, once again, it doesn't have the rest of the ingredients that are going to get the calcium into the bone. As I say, this has taken a lot of science, but we now understand it's not just calcium and vitamin D that are going to get the calcium in the bone. Yes, that's a good start, but if you take too much at one time, you're going to spike that calcium level and put yourself at risk for heart disease.
What is it about vitamin K2 that makes it so special for bone health, and why did we include it in Bone Essentials?
Yeah, we have seen studies recently that that vitamin K2 is essential, actually, to the bone recipe. And as I say, it's not only vitamin K2, but you saw the rest of them. You know, magnesium. Yeah, let's go back to that. Can you go back to that slide?
Mm-hmm.
No. There. See, it's this whole recipe here, and it's in the right amount, plus the vitamin K2. Where's my vitamin K2?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, vitamin K1, 2, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and vitamin D are all hugely important to this bone recipe.
How many milligrams does a woman need per day who is on bioidentical hormones?
At least 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams per day.
And what ratio diet and supplement? Will be sent out to you shortly, so feel free to spread it around to anybody you know or someone who might benefit from learning more information about calcium supplements and the best way to consume your calcium. Thank you very much for attending, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Aaron.